My name is Dee. Really great to have you here and a really warm welcome to Unexpected. Do keep coming in. Just so you know, if there's any emergency, the exits are all at the back of the building, so the door you came in through, or to the right or the left. So practical details over. Unexpected is a week here to give us a chance to look at the person of Jesus, and during the lunchtimes in particular, we're taking a closer look at the Christian faith and whether it stands up to scrutiny. So this lunchtime, we're thinking about unexpected guilt and whether the church has failed. In a moment, we'll be hearing a short talk, and after that, there'll be some time for questions. So please text in any questions you have to the number that you'll see on pillars in front of you. No question is off limits, so please get texting in. We're delighted to have Peter Dray here as our speaker. Pete works with the family of Christian Unions, helping students to engage with the claims of Jesus. So Pete has come from the northeast of England, and he's been with us every lunchtime this week. So please join me in welcoming Pete to the front.
Thanks, really lovely to see you here again this lunchtime. Do come in with your sandwich if you're in at the back. I've got about 20 minutes or so to consider this topic this lunchtime, unexpected guilt. Hasn't the church failed? And whilst I will leave some time for questions at the end, it may well be that we don't have time to go through all of the questions. I really hope that you'll be able to come to Cindy's afterwards. There'll be a group of us more than willing to hear your questions, potentially to give some longer answers. It might be as well that you want to pick up a copy of this book, Why Trust the Bible. It will be there for free. It includes chapter titles like, Isn't the Bible Sexist? What about all of the wars in the Bible? And Isn't the Bible out of date on sex? And so if that's one of your particular ways in which you want to think about Christianity and the way in which maybe it may have failed you or people that you know, why not come and grab a copy of that. So the issue that we're considering this lunchtime is that Christianity and the Christian message are discredited, are implausible because of the appalling moral track records that Christians have. It's not difficult to find people who are making that claim. The literary theorist Terry Eagleton criticises religion at large. He says, religion has wrought untold misery in human affairs. For the most part, it has been a squalid tale of bigotry, superstition, wishful thinking, and ideology. Stand Up, Marcus Brigstock wrote, open any history book and it will show you how war and religion are as intrinsically linked as ant and deck. You can technically have one without the other, but I'm not sure that anyone would really see the point. Sometimes, though, it is the hypocritical record of Christians in particular that is singled out. Ricky Gervais. It's not that I don't believe the teachings of Jesus wouldn't make this world a better world if they were followed. It's just that they're rarely followed by Christians. Or Mahatma Gandhi, reflecting on his time as an international student in London, said, I like your Christ, but not your Christians. In other words, the moral track record of Christians so contradicts what they say that Christianity is implausible. If Christians so spectacularly and so commonly fail, then who needs to consider the Christian faith? Others go even further, suggesting that it is something inherent to Christianity that causes Christians to behave badly. Bertrand Russell once wrote that the Christian religion as organised in its churches has been and still is the principal enemy of moral progress in the world today. And so he goes on to say, if you have been hurt by a Christian, it's more than likely it's their Christianity that caused them to treat you in the way that they did. Now, perhaps you've been coming along to things for this week and you are looking in at Christianity from the outside, but this sort of thing just turns you cold. Because if Christianity is shown to promote intolerance and bigotry and violence and hypocrisy and repression, then we don't want to be associated with it at all. So what does it look like to put Christianity's failings and the claims of people like Marcus Brigstock and Bertrand Russell under scrutiny? Does the apparent historic and contemporary failure of the church delegitimate the Christian message? This lunchtime I want to make an admission, and then I want to pose 3 questions on it. First, the admission. I want to freely admit that atrocity has been and is committed in the name of Christianity around the world on the most appalling of scales. In the year 2000, the late Pope John Paul II made a sweeping apology for the violence, persecution, and hypocrisy of the church. But the breadth of his apology shows how wide the church's failings have been. John Paul apologised in 7 categories, what he called general sins, sins in the service of truth, sins against Christian unity, sins against the Jews, sins against love, peace and cultures, sins against the dignity of women and minorities, and sins against human rights. And behind each of those broad categories are hundreds, thousands of little stories. By little, I don't mean that they don't matter, but particular stories. From child abuse and its cover-up, to the burning of people as witches and heretics, to the support of wicked regimes, to the sometimes culturally imperialistic way in which the Christian message has been shared. And we can bring it right up to date, can't we? Some of you will have seen the Channel 4 News investigation last Friday about alleged physical abuse of 28 schoolboys at Winchester College in the 1980s by a staff member of a Christian camp. Terrible things have been done in the name of Christianity. And it seems to me that if Christians are to celebrate the heroic moments of the church, the prominent role in defending the human rights of Native Americans, the foundational role in the anti-slavery movement, the groups of French Huguenots who sheltered Jews during the Holocaust, if we're to celebrate those things, then we must also own its failures, the church's failures. See, the truth is that too often violence has claimed the support of Christian teaching. That appalling discrimination, violence, and exploitation have occurred in Jesus' name. I remember when I was doing my master's, the shock at finding out that Guatemala's worst dictator came from exactly the same part of the church that formed me. That is beyond embarrassing to me. That is shameful. Now, closer to home, Christians are also implicated. I've not gone as far as some of the failings that I've mentioned, I don't think. But I sometimes have used the fact that I am a Christian to be an excuse for being arrogant or self-righteous or to lack empathy with others who are different from me. I want to say that Christians, those of us who are Christians here this lunchtime, are not just part of the cure when it comes to this issue. We're also part of the disease. Maybe you see that in your dearest Christian friends here, that you love them and respect them, but you know what? There are aspects of their character which you find hard to bear with. And if you have spiritual questions, you would think twice about coming to the Christian Union here. maybe the cut is even deeper. It's possible that there are some here this lunchtime who have been deeply hurt by Christians. And if that is you here today, above all, I want to communicate genuine sorrow to you. If I may speak personally, there was a time in my life in which I experienced post-traumatic stress because of the behaviour of other Christians in my life. And so I want to say I entirely understand that if for you, your personal history, along with any other right-thinking person, might cause you to question the whole plausibility of following Jesus. At one level then, the answer to the question, has the church failed, can be given in just one word. Yes. And yet in gentleness, I want to suggest this lunchtime that I don't think that is the whole story. And in order to get a fuller answer to this issue, I want us to consider 3 supplementary questions. Here's the first one. Is the track record of the Church of Christians simply of failure? Even is it mostly of failure? See, popular culture tells us that Christians are easy to locate as those who are permanently located on the wrong side of history. That century after century, Christians have been the ones who dug in their heels against progress, who've sided with the despots and the oppressors over the Democrats. They preferred hierarchy over equality, patriarchy over women's rights, and absolutism over tolerance. And I suppose the first question I want to ask is that really true? Because I think there's a temptation to have a bumper sticker view of Christianity, which ignores Christianity's positive contributions. In fact, I want to say that I believe that Christianity is often so grossly misrepresented that can only be attributed either to the most amazing naivety or to a willful attempt to mislead. That's the case, for example, when it comes to the burning of witches. Some of you will have seen the popular internet meme that tells us that 9 million women were burned as witches. Now, the fact is that that is nearly 200 times the number who were burned as witches, according to the latest academic studies. That is still 50,000 people, and that is 50,000 too many. But for that 9 million figure to keep being rehearsed as it is, either comes from incredible naivety or a deliberate attempt to deceive. Listen, I want to say this lunchtime that it is right for Christianity to be faced with its genuine abuses. But in the name of intellectual honesty, isn't it important that they're accurately reported? And additionally, it seems to me that the very real failures of Christians that I've outlined in part need to be held alongside Christianity's positive contribution. None of us would think it fair, for example, would we, if a future biographer only included our most shameful moments in our biography? I would feel rightly wronged if my biographer only included the time when I told a blind person to get stronger glasses, or the time when I faked my mum's signature to say that she'd read my school report, and that I let one of my friends down at university very seriously, and even that my heroic, so-called heroic, sports injury was incurred taking a throw-in. And most fair-minded thinkers concede that in order to paint Christianity rightly, we need to use more than just primary colours. Vincent Carroll and David Shiflett, for example, write this: "The story of Christianity has been turbulent and tragic, blood-splattered and cruel, but that is far from the sum total of its legacy. Christianity also boasts magnificent redeeming achievements, shining moments when civilizing values have seized the upper hand, and these too must be remembered." And so shouldn't the positive contributions of Christianity be considered? Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, for example, shows that his passion to take on the racism of the day was rooted explicitly in a divine appeal. Lord Shaftesbury, the so-called poor man's Earl, explicitly tied his campaign for the rights of mentally ill people and those working in dangerous jobs to a biblical understanding of human dignity. Today, 80% of voluntary youth work in the UK is performed by Christians. You might highlight the Food Bank network, set up by the Trust All Trust, that fed 2 million people in our country last year. You might note the humble and hidden acts of love performed by Christians every day in this city that history never footnotes. And if we're to consider Christianity fairly, should these not also be considered? That leads us to a second issue. Yes, Christians have failed. But to what extent, we might ask, should we make comparisons? For example, what was the moral record of medieval Christians like to broader medieval culture? Today, how do the failings of Christians compare to those from other backgrounds? And the answers are complex. But even a grasp at the past 100 years of history suggests that Christians have not been alone in inflicting violence and abuse. Christians have not been the only hypocrites. Think about violence, all sorts of regimes, communist, atheist, secular, Islamic, have committed awful acts of hypocrisy and ferocity and oppression. And it would seem to me that to single out Christianity alone is unfair. Reflecting upon the history of moral failure by a broad sweep of humanity, philosopher Keith Ward concludes like this: all human beings, religious or not, are prone to evil. Human beings are dangerous, and anything they believe or do will probably go terribly wrong at some point. All human beings are prone to evil. May I even suggest all human beings are prone to hypocrisy too. Now hear me right, I'm not making a political point here. But it was interesting to see the responses to one of Jeremy Corbyn's tweets last week. He tweeted, many of you will have seen it, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." It's a fine sentence, full of truth. It was retweeted more than 360,000 times last time I looked. But Jeremy Corbyn was also viciously criticised, and not just from the political right, but the left as well, given his own track record of being unwilling to denounce certain terrorist groups during his political career. Now, I've mentioned Jeremy Corbyn here, but you could have probably gone for almost any politician of any political stripe. My point is this, that there is so often a gap between what we profess and how we live. It's earthy language and probably not often used in a context like this, but the Yale philosopher Harry Frankfurt put it like this: one of the salient features of our culture is that there is so much bullshit. Everyone knows this because each of us contributes his share. Now, psychological research tells us we are much more likely to judge others by a higher standard than we judge ourselves. So this is difficult, but will you reflect on your own life for a moment? I wonder if you too have a tendency sometimes to do what you want, providing the justification that you need, thereby deviating from your stated ideals. Have you done that? I certainly have. Is that tendency really unique to Christians? Isn't it true that in all of us, so often there is a gap between how we like to think of ourselves, how we aspire to be, and the reality of how we often are? That brings us to the third and most serious question. Do the church's failings follow as a direct consequence of fidelity to Christianity and to the teachings of Jesus? Now again, I want to freely admit there have been times in which Christians have claimed the Bible's support for incredibly evil actions. That was true during the Crusades. But the question is this: were those Christians at that point being faithful to the Bible, or were they ignoring its teaching? Now you may well have heard of the so-called texts of terror of the Old Testament, and I'll do my best to take any questions that you might have about them later. But let me say, when you read the Bible in its context, as a whole, it is unambiguously clear that Christians today are called to love and bless and do good to others, even to their enemies, even when they are cursed and hated and persecuted in return. And Christians who do anything else are technically oxymorons. I want to go even further. I want to suggest that to be a Christian is to submit to the toughest counter-hypocrisy program you can possibly imagine. See, atheists face a dilemma. In order to counter hypocrisy, atheists somehow have to find a standard by which to judge this behaviour. And if God doesn't exist, as we've already thought this week, no objective morality exists. And so Christians are able to use universal moral categories that are not accessible to the atheist. I can call the Crusades evil. I can call child abuse evil. If you're an atheist, you can't. The most you can say is, I feel some discomfort about those things. All it will do is make you cynical, probably. That Christianity alone can provide the moral seriousness that the sorts of tragedies we've been thinking about this lunchtime demand. Now, read through Luke's Gospel, the account of Jesus' life that we're making available this week. And you don't have to read very far at all to see that Jesus hates hypocrisy. And he is especially outraged by religious hypocrisy, when religion is used as a cover. Turn with me to just one example of this on page 40 in chapter 11. The context here is that there's a religious person and he's justifying his own moral shortcomings in the name of his ritualistic purity. And what Jesus is doing here is he's criticising the man for kind of external jots and tittles of legalistic obedience, but having an unchanged heart. Look at me from verse 38 on page 40. It says, the Pharisee was surprised when he noticed that Jesus did not first wash before the meal. It's not hygiene here, this is religious obedience. Then the Lord said to him, now then, you Pharisees, you clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. You foolish people! Did not the one who made the outside not make the inside also? But now, as for what is inside you, be generous to the poor. Everything will be clean for you. Woe to you, Pharisees! Because you give God 1/10 of your mint and rue and all kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone. And do you know what the passage goes on? Jesus was hard on hypocrites, and he was especially hard on those who use religion as a mask for covering up their motives. So what does that mean? It means that following Jesus inevitably provides a check upon the hypocritical instincts of your own heart. See, as a Christian, as I submit to Jesus, as I take his words to heart, my own potential for hypocrisy, not least in a context like this, my own potential to exploit others is clarified and checked. Even more than this, for Christians, the supreme example of human evil in general and religious hypocrisy specifically is seen in the death of Jesus Christ. I don't know if you've ever thought about it this way, but Jesus was put to death by the church of his day. They're widely recognised by people of all sorts of different backgrounds to be the personification of love. Jesus was crucified by those who were convinced that they were doing right in the name of religion. And therefore, as a Christian, the death of Jesus highlights to me the absolute danger of religious abuse. Christians should be more aware of that than anyone. And so the point is this: Christianity generates its own critique. I can pretty much guarantee to you that your Christian friend here will be more aware than most of just how possible it is to say one thing and to have a heart somewhere else. And that's not come despite their Christianity, but because of their Christianity. And yet here is the wonder of it all. That Jesus claimed that that very death that was caused by human evil and religious hypocrisy brings forgiveness. That same death brings forgiveness to all who will come to him, regardless of what they've done, regardless of their track record, regardless of how they've behaved. And that means for you this lunchtime, whether or not you would call yourself a Christian, whatever abuses you may have committed in the name of Christianity or another religion or anything else at all, whatever you've done, wherever you're from, whatever you're like, however far short you've fallen, Jesus' sacrifice is enough to bring forgiveness from the God of the universe to you. So as we get ready to take questions, I want to say this. Popular culture says the church has failed and Christians are hypocrites. And I want to say, yes, absolutely right. And that is true because Christians are human beings. Do you know what one of my favourite Christian preachers once said? If you could see my heart, you would spit in my face. I'll say that of myself this lunchtime. I include myself amongst the number of Christians who have failed others. But I also want to suggest to you this lunchtime that Jesus represents history's most powerful assault on hypocrisy. Jesus offers the world's strongest counter and remedy to hypocrisy. See, without truth, there is no freedom from hypocrisy. And Jesus confronts each of us as we are in our failures this lunchtime, in our hypocrisy. In fact, no one has ever been more serious on moral failure and hypocrisy than Jesus in history. No one. No one has ever seriously accused Jesus of hypocrisy or a lack of integrity. And so isn't it amazing that no one has ever been more committed to bringing forgiveness to the hypocrite than Jesus, even at the cost of his own death. And so no one offers a sterner rebuke but a more effective cure to our common failings than Jesus of Nazareth. As he shows us his pierced hands, he says, "Come to me." And as he then frees us to live lives of service and love. In a moment, V is going to come up and take us through the next bit. Whilst she's getting ready to come up, it would really help the Christian Union here if you could take the little form that is in front of you. And maybe that everybody here, whether or not you're a member of CICCU, whether or not you would describe yourself as a Christian, just write down some thoughts about what's happened today. It could be about the quality of the sandwiches, the quality of the microphone, the quality of the speaker. It might be that you just have some questions that you would like somebody to chat further with you about. If you could just, everybody here, just take a moment to write down a couple of thoughts, that would be really helpful to us. And then V will come up and she will tell us some of the questions that you've been texting in.
Great, thanks so much, Pete. Do keep texting your questions and seeing out the cards. We're going to start with our first question now. So, Pete, in previous talks, you spoke about objective ethics being found in Christianity. Do the changing views of the church not indicate that Christian ethics are actually subjective?
That is a very good question. Just give me the last phrase, the last clause. Do the
changing views of the church not indicate that Christian ethics, insofar as human subjects practice them, are subjective?
Okay, great question. I will do my best. I will give quite a short answer, but a longer answer. Cindy's is the place. Christianity is all about relating to God. The one true God, He's made it possible for us to relate to Him through Jesus' death on the cross. And what does it mean to be a Christian in the light of the forgiveness that you've received in Jesus? It's about learning to love the things that He loves and to treat others with the same quality and depth of love that He's shown us. Now, one of the things that will strike you as you read the Bible is that there is amazing cultural flex in what it looks like to follow Jesus wholeheartedly. You even see that within examples within the Bible. And therefore, what it looks like to share God's passions and desires means one thing in a nomadic culture 3,000 years ago in the middle of the desert. It means another thing doing that as the head of, say, a family in Greco-Roman culture. It means another thing doing it in the Middle East in the 6th century. It means another thing doing it in Cambridge in the 21st century. Now, what Christians like me are called to do then is to deduce what is timeless from the Bible's teaching. God doesn't change, okay? It's not grown up. It's not, changed his mind on things. He doesn't change. And the fundamental nature of humanity hasn't changed either. And so there's a substantial amount of Christian teaching that hasn't changed. Culture does change. And therefore, in some ways, what it looks like for me to love my sons in the 21st century would look slightly differently, maybe, from what it would look like in the 1st century or the 6th century in a different culture. Technological change isn't explicit in the Bible. There is not a chapter which says, thou shalt use thy mobile phone in this way. And so what Christians have to do is they have to think, okay, well, given that we live in a technological culture, what are the particular ways in which we might be called to use our mobile phones? And what are the ways in which we might want to use our mobile phones in a way which is different from the culture around us? Now, it is fair to say that amongst Christians there's sometimes debates, and much of that debate is healthy. Some of that debate is unhealthy. And essentially it's when we bring our culture as the lens to stand over Scripture. We can say, well, look, we are in the 21st century now. Clearly God didn't know what he was doing when he said these things. No. As Christians, we submit our culture to the Word of God and not the other way around. And if there are specific things that you want to talk about in relating to that issue, then I would love to chat to you afterwards.
Thank you so much. There were lots of questions, and I'm afraid we've run out of time. We've got time for, but please do come to these after. So,
Sure.
Thank you, Pete. Brilliant. We're going to have to leave the building quite promptly, and please take any rubbish with you. But all this week we've been hosting a cafe in Cindy's with free tea and coffee from now till 4 o'clock. So please do head on over there if you'd like to chat more about this question or any other, or if you'd just like to have a space to chill over tea and cake. Pete will be there. He would love to carry on the conversation. There were lots of questions we didn't get to get through. And there will also be copies of the book that Pete mentioned, Why Trust the Bible. That would be a really great way of seeing for yourself, investigating for yourself whether the evidence stacks up. There are lots of other books there as well that will help you think through a whole range of topics. And of course, as you leave, please do take away a copy of Luke's account of Jesus' life to read later.